The letter had promised someone ordinary, plain, she'd written, practical, willing to work hard, eager to leave behind a life of loss and loneliness. Someone who could cook, clean, tend chickens, and keep quiet when silence was better than words. But the woman who stepped down from that stagecoach did not look like she'd ever tended a chicken in her life. I watched her from the porch, hidden behind the thick post where I used to rest my coffee cup. My boots were still muddy from clearing the fence line. My shirt, damp with sweat, stuck to my chest in 3 places, and my hands calloused, scarred, browned by years of honest sun curled into fists as I took in the sight of her dot. She moved like music. The wind caught her auburn hair, sending it flying behind her like a banner of silk. Her dress, though dust-stained from 3 days' travel, was cut from finer fabric than I'd ever seen this side of St. Louis. High-necked, navy blue, with satin ribbons near the sleeves. Her boots weren't ranch-worn but polished to a shine, and the way she turned her head to survey the ranch chin, slightly raised, eyes scanning like she was already judging the place scent. Something sharp twisting in my gut. This wasn't Iris Quaid, or if it was, she'd lied through her teeth. She stepped lightly down the last wooden step of the coach, her hand gripping a small leather satchel. The driver tipped his hat and tossed down her trunk, a small, battered thing that didn't match the woman at all. "Mr. Briggs?" she called out, her voice smooth and clear. Almost too formal. I stepped out. "That's me." She smiled, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Something brittle, desperate. "I'm Iris Quaid." She hesitated, then added, "From the letters." I nodded slowly, unsure whether to laugh, curse, or check if I'd gone crazy. The silence stretched. She looked around again at the barn, the well, the lone oak tree at the center of the yard, and for a moment her shoulders sagged like someone watching a dream die. "I may have misled you a bit," she said softly, almost like she hoped the breeze would carry the words away. "You don't say," I muttered, glancing at her trunk. "You sure you meant to come here?" "No," she said quietly. "But I had to. I didn't understand it then, not fully. But something about the way she said it, like there was a fire behind her, and this ranch was the only patch of dirt left untouched, made my pause. I should have turned her away. I knew it, but instead I stepped aside and opened the door. "You can sleep in the back room," I said. "If you're staying," she smiled like she might cry. "Thank you." I didn't smile back, because everything in my gut told me I'd just let a storm walk through my front door, and the real damage hadn't even started yet. By morning, I'd convinced myself she might just be eccentric, strange, a little too polished for a place like this, but harmless. Maybe she'd grown up proper and wanted something different. I didn't know much about women, and even less about ones who wore perfume to breakfast. She stood out by the fence after coffee, gazing over the pasture like she was seeing it for the first time. Her hair was pinned neatly today, that same satchel resting on the fence post beside her. The hens clucked around her boots. My dog Jasper watched her warily. "Do you ride?" I asked from the porch. She turned, slow and thoughtful. "I used," she said. "Side saddle. But I'd like to learn properly. If I'm to stay," something about the way she said "if" stuck with me. Like she already doubted she could. I was halfway to answering when hooves sounded on the trail behind the barn. Not 1 horse 3. I squinted, shielding my eyes. The men who came into view didn't ride like locals. They rode straight-backed, fine horses under them, dust-free coats and tight expressions. City men, the kind who didn't get their hands dirty unless they were signing a death warrant. Iris stiffened. Her hand crept toward the satchel, then dropped. The lead rider, a square-jawed man in a gray duster and a red vest, reined in his horse and took off his hat with exaggerated care. "Miss Petton," he called out, voice clipped and smooth. "You've caused quite the stir." I looked at her. "Petton?" She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the man. Not fear, exactly, but something close. The second man chuckled. "You were supposed to be in St. Louis 3 days ago, Victoria." That name hit me harder than a fist. Victoria Petton. Everyone west of the Mississippi had heard that name-banking family, engaged to some political darling seen in every newspaper society column. "You lied," I said low. She swallowed. I had no choice. The lead man dismounted and walked toward her, boot heels clicking like lawmen in a silent town. "Your fiance's been worried sick," he said. "Your father, too. They sent us to bring you home." "I'm not going back," she said. Her voice was steel now. "This isn't a choice," the third man said coldly. "You belong to that house. That family." I stepped forward before I could think. "She doesn't belong to anyone." The men sized me up like I was a mule with a limp. The lead man looked me over and sneered. "And you are?" "Sawyer Briggs. This here's my ranch, and Miss Petton is trespassing under a false name. She's my guest," I said. "You can get off my land now," he laughed. "Your guest? Do you know who she is?" I didn't look at her, but I felt her trembling. She was clutching the satchel again. Not for comfort, for courage. "I know she came here under Iris Quaid. I know she's hiding from something that scares her. And I know if you don't turn around and ride out, this is going to get ugly." He stepped close enough to touch me. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "You did." When you made her run, a tense silence fell. Then, slowly, they backed off. But not before the lead man turned to Victoria and said, "You've got until next Sunday. Then it won't be a conversation." They mounted and rode off, dust swirling behind them. When the silence returned, Victoria, no longer Iris, let out a breath like she'd been drowning. Her shoulders sagged. She looked at me, truly looked, and for the first time I saw the storm behind those perfect green eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't come here to lie. I came here to escape." I nodded slowly. "Well, you're not the only one running from something." She blinked at that. "What were you running from?" I looked out at the horizon, then back at her. Peace and quiet, apparently. We didn't laugh. But something passed between us, honest, sharp, and unspoken. She was no longer the stranger in the fine dress, and I was no longer a man with an empty porch. The men came back the next day. We heard them before we saw them, same 3 riders, same calm arrogance in their posture. But this time they didn't shout or threaten. They dismounted without a word, tethered their horses by the barn, and walked up the path with the quiet confidence of men who thought the law, wealth, and family name were all stitched into their spines. Victoria stood beside me on the porch. No corset today, no ribbons. Just a faded blouse I'd lent her, sleeves rolled, her hair in a loose braid. Somehow she looked more dangerous like that. More real. The lead man, Thornton, pulled out a small folded paper and held it up. "A formal request for Miss Petton's return," he said. "Signed by her father and fiancé, accompanied by a second request for the return of a family heirloom stolen during her disappearance." Victoria's jaw tightened. "You mean my mother's necklace?" Thornton's smile was thin and practiced. "It was part of the engagement contract, given as a token. Now it's been reported stolen." "She gave it to me the night she died," Victoria said, voice rising. "It wasn't a gift from him. It was hers. It's mine." The second man stepped forward. "You're welcome to keep your sentiment. We just want the item." Victoria's hand went to her collar. The necklace was there, a delicate gold chain with a red stone at its center. I'd seen her fingers brush it while she stood by the fire, or while reading on the porch. It wasn't just a necklace. It was the last thing that hadn't been taken from her. "She's not giving it to you," I said flatly. "Then we'll report it as theft," Thornton replied. "And next time we return, it'll be with more than paper." Victoria didn't speak. She didn't move. Then, with slow, deliberate hands, she unclasped the necklace and stared at it. "Is this what you're really here for?" she asked. "Not me. Not the contract. Just this little chain to prove your control." "Return it," Thornton said, holding out his palm. Her fingers closed tight. And then, with a sudden, reckless movement, she hurled the necklace into the scrub out past the porch, into the tall grass and mesquite, where it vanished like a stone into deep water. "You want it?" she snapped. "Go crawl for it." The three men froze. They hadn't expected that. None of us had. She turned to me. "I'm not a necklace. I'm not property. And I'm not going back." Her voice cracked at the end, but her spine stayed straight. For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Thornton swore under his breath and turned to his men. "Mount up." They didn't bother searching the brush dot as their horses thundered away. Victoria stepped off the porch and sat on the edge of the trough, her breathing shaky, her eyes staring down at her hands. I walked over and sat beside her. "You know," I said, "I was starting to think you were all show." She didn't smile. But she didn't cry either. "I was born in a cage," she said, "with gold walls. And every time I tried to climb out, they hung another necklace around my neck." I looked at her, then really looked. "I'm not going to put a cage around you," I said. "Not even with good intentions." She turned her head. "Even if it brings danger?" I figured danger's already here. That was the moment I stopped being neutral. The moment I stepped into the storm, not just to shield her, but to stand beside her. That night, the oil lamp burned low in the kitchen, throwing long shadows across the walls. Outside, coyotes howled at the edge of the canyon, and the stars blinked like they were keeping secrets of their own. I found her by the stove, stirring a pot of beans with slow, mechanical care. Her shoulders were stiff, her face drawn in tight lines. She hadn't spoken since she'd tossed her inheritance into the brush like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was the final link in a chain she'd worn all her life. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, not turning. "For what?" "For lying," she said. "About who I was. About everything." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You going to tell me the truth now?" She nodded, then sat down at the table, folding her hands like a schoolgirl about to confess. But there was nothing childish in her voice. "My real name is Victoria Rose Pettin, daughter of Elias Pettin, president of the Union Bank of Missouri. I was engaged to be married to Franklin Kavanaugh State Senator's son, future governor, maybe even president someday." She looked up at me. "But they never asked me if I wanted any of that. They just signed me over. Like a title deed." I didn't interrupt. I let her keep going. "Franklin isn't just cruel," she said. "He's dangerous. The kind who can smile in church on Sunday and have someone's house burned down on Monday. My father knew. Didn't care. Said women like me don't get to be happy. We get to be useful." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded envelope. Yellowed, creased, like she'd read it 100 times. "It's a letter from my mother," she said. "Written before she died. She told me to run. Said if I ever had the courage to leave everything and go find the kind of life she never got." "And Iris Quaid?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "A woman I met on a train last year. A widow, kind. She told me about mail-order bride arrangements out west. Said it was the only way she survived after the war. I bought her name off her. $20 and a train ticket." I let out a low whistle. "That's a mighty expensive alias." She met my eyes. "It was cheaper than a funeral." The room went quiet. Only the pop of the firewood filled the space between us. "Why me?" I asked. "Why this ranch? You could have gone anywhere." "I read your letters," she said softly. "They weren't poetic or flowery, but they were kind, honest. You said you weren't looking for a wife so much as a reason to speak again in the mornings. That stuck with me." I rubbed my jaw. "I meant that. I know," she said. "And I wanted to meet the man who could say something like that without shame." A long silence settled between us again, but it wasn't heavy. It felt earned. like both of us had peeled something back and neither had looked away. "I should go," she said after a while. "You didn't ask for this mess." "No," I said. "But I reckon you're not a mess. You're a fire, and I'd rather warm my hands by it than sit cold and safe the rest of my life." Her eyes went wide, then soft. I hadn't meant to say it like that, but it came out true, like most of my words around her. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, fingers trembling, callus-free, but strong all the same. That was the first time she'd touched me. Not as Iris Quaid, not as Victoria Petton, just as herself. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Victoria Dot. She curled up on the cot in the back room, the door left slightly ajar. I sat in my old rocker on the porch, Winchester across my lap, boots planted firm like roots. The moonlight spilled silver over the barn, and I could hear the horses shifting in their stalls, restless, like they knew what was coming, and come it did. Just after dawn, the low rumble of hooves rolled in from the ridge, but this time it wasn't 3 men in suits. It was 7 men, armed, and at the front, riding with a badge on his chest and a folded paper in his gloved hand, was a federal marshal. Victoria stepped out behind me, tying her braid with shaking fingers. I rose, already feeling the old tension in my back, the kind I hadn't felt since the war. The marshal dismounted. Not young, not old, weathered, like a man who'd spent his life doing hard things and convincing himself they were necessary. He nodded at me, then looked to Victoria. "Miss Petton?" She stepped forward. "Yes, I have a warrant for your arrest. Theft of government bonds, valued at $10,000. Signed by Judge Riley of St. Louis." I stiffened. "That's a lie. She's no thief," I said. The marshal held out the warrant. Then the judge was misled. "But the paper stands." Victoria didn't flinch. "They forged this. My fiancé, my father. They want to drag me back, and this is their way." The marshal looked at her hard. "You saying this is political?" "I'm saying it's personal," she shot back. "They don't like women running away from arranged futures. So they built a noose made of ink and law." I stepped between them. "She's under my roof. You ain't dragging her off this land unless you prove to me she took anything." The other men reached for their weapons, but the marshal raised a hand. He wasn't looking for a fight. "Not yet, Mr. Briggs. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to follow paper. That's all. That paper's poison," I growled. "I've seen cleaner words in war orders." Victoria stepped around me and looked the marshal in the eye. "I have a letter, written by my father. It says I've been disowned. No claim to land, money, or bonds. He signed it in fury the day I left." She reached into her satchel, pulled out the folded parchment with shaking fingers, and handed it over. The marshal unfolded it slowly, reading every line twice. His brow furrowed deeper with each sentence. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "This says you had no access to any funds, no signature rights, no inheritance, no assets." "Exactly," she said. "So how could I have stolen anything?" The men behind him shifted, unsure. The marshal exhaled slowly, folding the letter back up. "Then this warrant is baseless," he said. "I'll take it back to the judge." "But the bonds," one of the men insisted. She what?" The marshal snapped. "Stole money she never had access to? From a vault she wasn't allowed near? Signed a contract she was never legally party to?" The man went quiet. Victoria stood straighter. The marshal turned to her again, this time with something like respect. "If you're lying, the truth will catch up. But I don't think you are." "I'm not," she said. "Then you stay right here, Miss Petton, and I'll do my part." They rode off slower this time. No smugness, no threats. Victoria stood still for a long moment after they disappeared. Then she whispered, "They won't stop." "No," I said. "But neither will we." And this time when I looked at her, I didn't see a runaway heiress. I saw a woman holding her ground. The marshal returned the next morning, alone. Dust clung to his coat and sweat marked the rim of his hat, but his expression was unreadable somewhere between duty and disbelief. He handed Victoria her father's letter without a word and leaned on the porch rail like a man bracing for a storm. "I showed that letter to Judge Riley," he said. "He spent 5 minutes pretending it didn't matter, and then he tore up the warrant." Victoria's breath caught. "So I'm free?" "For now," the marshal said. "You've no criminal claim against you, but I wouldn't take that as safety. Thornton's the type who don't like losing, and your father's influence reaches deeper than most trees got roots." I stepped beside her. "So what now?" The marshal glanced over his shoulder. "Now I ride back and say the law's done with her. But I'd keep your eyes open. Men like Thornton don't let go easy." He tipped his hat and rode off without another word. Victoria stood motionless, holding the letter like it might crumble to dust. I walked her inside, sat her down, and poured 2 cups of coffee with shaking hands. She stared at the letter. "I read this so many times," she said quietly. "It was the worst thing he ever wrote to me. I kept it because I thought I needed to remember why I left." I nodded. "Maybe now it's proof you were right, too." Her fingers tightened around the edges. "You know what he wrote after disowning me? 'You'll come back crawling when the world teaches you what.' It's like without my name. Sounds like a man who's terrified of losing power. He was. Still is. But I'm not crawling." She rose, walked to the fireplace, and held the letter over the flames. "You sure?" I asked. She hesitated. "Yes, I've carried this shame long enough." She dropped it in. The flames caught fast, curling the paper inward like a dying leaf. The ink warped, darkened, disappeared. We watched it burn in silence. Later, she stood by the window, arms crossed over her chest. "They'll try again," she said. "If not with law, then something darker." "I'll be ready," I said. "We'll be ready." She turned to me then, and the woman standing there looked nothing like the one who stepped off the stagecoach days ago. Gone was the polished heiress, the frightened runaway. What remained was someone forged in fire and wind. "I came here thinking I'd hide," she said. "But I don't want to hide anymore." I took a step closer. "Then don't," she smiled. "Not the kind you give to strangers, or in polite society, but something honest, warm, full of light and grit. You think your ranch can hold all this trouble?" she asked. I laughed. "Ma'am, this ranch has held locusts, fires, drought, and a mule with brain rot. I reckon it can handle one determined woman." That made her laugh too. A real one this time. It echoed through the kitchen and out into the fields. The kind of laugh that makes ghosts quiet down and dust settle. And just like that, the weight in the room shifted. Not gone, but shared. 3 days passed. Peace held like a breath waiting to be broken. Victoria worked beside me in the field. Sleeves rolled, her hands blistered but steady. At night, we sat on the porch, watching the stars stretch across the sky like old songs. There were no more lies, no aliases, just quiet truths and unspoken questions about what came next. Then, on the 4th morning, Thornton returned, but not with warrants or the marshal. This time, he rode in with 4 hired men, guns on their hips, cold in their eyes, every one of them dressed like they'd come to settle something permanent. I met them at the edge of the yard. Victoria stepped out behind me, her face calm, her braid loose over one shoulder. Thornton dismounted and strode up like a man walking, into his own parlor. "You've made this harder than it needed to be," he said, brushing dust off his sleeve. "But we're not here for games anymore." "You're not here at all," I said, gripping the rifle propped against my leg. "You're trespassing. I'm here for a legal claim," he snapped. "Miss Patton violated a marriage contract with my employer. There are consequences." Victoria stepped forward. "Marriage contracts are not enforceable, Mr. Thornton. Not in this territory. Not without a signature from both parties. And I never signed." He blinked, then sneered. "You think that's going to hold up in court?" "You tried court," I said. "It spat you out." He looked to his men, nodding subtly. "You planning on dragging her off by force?" I asked. "Because that'll go bad. Fast." "No one's dragging anyone," he said. "But maybe it's time to make her understand what she's walking away from." Victoria crossed her arms. "Go ahead. Tell me." He stepped forward, lowering his voice like it made him more powerful. You're walking away from a mansion, title, wealth, a life where you don't have to sweat in fields or scrub dishes. I'm walking toward a life I chose, she said. He looked at me then. And what do you offer her, rancher? Chickens and dirt? I smiled slow. That's right. And peace, which is more than she ever had under your thumb. Thornton's face darkened. He turned to his men. Let's remind them. Don't, came a voice from behind. It was the marshal. He rode in alone. Again, badge flashing in the sun, shotgun slung across his saddle. Calm as a church bell. Thornton stiffened. This isn't your jurisdiction. It is now, the marshal said, swinging down. Got a telegram this morning. Judge Riley opened an investigation into your use of fraudulent warrants. And if I catch wind you threaten violence here, I'll throw you in a cell myself. Thornton looked rattled. The hired guns hesitated. Victoria stepped forward, voice steady as a sunrise. You lost, Thornton. Not just the law. Not just your little power games. You lost me. And you'll never get me back. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Thornton spat in the dirt, climbed on his horse, and rode out without another word. The others followed. When the dust cleared, the only sound was the wind rustling the dry grass. The marshal tipped his hat. Y'all take care now, he said, then turned and rode off, leaving us alone again. Victoria let out a long breath, her shoulders finally sinking like the weight had lifted. They won't try again, I said. No, she whispered. Not after today. She turned to me, eyes wide with something I hadn't seen before. Not fear. Not exhaustion, but freedom. The ranch was quiet again. Not the uneasy quiet that comes before a storm, but the kind that follows one. The kind you earn. Victoria and I sat on the porch that evening, her fingers curled around a tin cup of coffee, my arm draped along the back of the bench. Jasper dozed at our feet. The chickens rustled softly in the coop, and the sky blushed pink with the setting sun. I keep thinking it's not real, she said quietly. That I'll wake up and be back in that house, being fitted for another dress I didn't choose, nodding through another meeting about my future like it belonged to someone else. You're awake, I said. And you're here. She turned to me. Is your offer still good? What offer? To stay, to become. Mrs. Briggs. My heart thudded once. Then again, slow, solid. I meant it then. Mean it now, I said. But only if that's what you want. She looked down at her hands, rougher now than they were a week ago. A blister had popped on her palm from hauling water. Her braid was loose, her dress faded, and her cheeks freckled from sun. She'd never looked more beautiful. I don't want a title, she said. I don't want anyone's name just for the sake of safety. But I want yours, because you gave it without strings. I didn't speak. I just reached over and laced our fingers together. You sure? I asked. She smiled. I've never been more sure of anything. We didn't kiss. Not yet. It wasn't time. Not the way folks do in storybooks. But something passed between us just as deep. A promise made in the dust and blood and fire. The woman who stepped off that stagecoach was running. The woman sitting beside me now, she wasn't running anymore. She had made her choice. Her name, her life, her home, and she chose it all with both eyes open.